The king would have been attended by his main architect, his cousin Hemiunu. Beneath them, the king would have been able to see some 25,000 workers. Conscripts, quarrymen, stone haulers, setters, masons, for whom he was responsible, whom he had brought to Giza to collaborate as humans never had before. What had driven him to do it? To answer that question long seemed only a distant possibility. Until, just over a century ago, archaeologists working on the pyramid of a later king called Unas unearthed a chamber whose walls were covered in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The pyramid texts provide a tantalizing glimpse into the minds of the men who built the pyramids. From these spells, incantations, and riddles, a story emerges, the story of a journey. The king travels, and travels up. His journey is described in many ways, as a falcon, or with the aid of natural storms of wind and hail and lightning. The pyramid texts always describe the end of this journey in the same mysterious way, that the king can now go forth among the indestructibles. To understand this mystery is to understand the very purpose of a pyramid. But these mysterious beliefs were not widely understood. They were the preserve of an initiated few. Khufu's workers had more ordinary concerns, ensuring that 1,000 tons of stone were moved each day onto the pyramid's slowly rising surface.
"5 years passed after Deba's death. I was one of the most experienced men on site when Yunu accorded me a special honor. I had seen Hemiunu on the outcrop, but had never imagined that I would be introduced to him. He had a special task for me, one that could only be understood with a special blessing. Words that were to change my life.
Some 10 years after work began on the Great Pyramid, a barge approached Giza with a special cargo. It had come more than 500 miles from the quarries at Aswan. On board was a single granite block. The block was one of 9 that were being brought to Giza, together the most vital 9 blocks of all the millions that make up the Great Pyramid. Each one weighed upward of 50 tons, and 200 men would be required to move it. King Khufu's upper burial chamber was ready to be completed, and the 9 granite blocks would form its roof. Each block had to be dragged across the unfinished pyramid and put in place above the chamber beneath.
I had the scribes draw a reference in red ochre down the exact center of each block, and I seated myself on top of the first block at one end of the chamber. I held up a plumb bob, and I aligned it with both the red reference mark on the incoming block and the central marker post beyond. That way I could keep the block exactly central as it passed over the chamber. Such a vast weight had to be perfectly distributed. The words of Hemiunu's blessing were ringing in my ears. So this holy chamber was the center, the purpose of the whole pyramid. It had to be protected.
Khufu's architects were facing a structural problem never faced before in history. The mass of stone with which they were working and the width they were spanning presented difficulties that would tax any modern construction engineer. It appears that soon after it was fitted, one of the granite roof blocks started to crack. The architect's first reaction was to repeat the roofing process a further 4 times. But the decisive innovation was to add a triangular wedge at the top, which redistributed the weight outwards rather than downwards. The crawl spaces between the 5 roofs, just 3.5 feet high, provide a unique glimpse into the lost world of the pyramid makers. Graffiti left behind by the workers spell out the names of the gangs. This is the mark of the strong boatmen of Khufu. Here, simply, the pure. It is even possible to see the red ochre reference marks, the means by which 4,500 years ago, master stone movers guided in the granite blocks with such phenomenal precision. The last third of the pyramid could not be reached by the main ramp. Instead, a spiral ramp was used, supported on the stepped sides of the pyramid and climbing up with it. Up this spiral ramp, the most expert stone hauling gangs dragged the final blocks until the very top was reached.
It fell to my gang to lay the capstone. It had been prepared by the masons more carefully than all the others. Its sides were perfectly smooth, but beneath there was a plug of rock left protruding. We rotated the block until the plug fitted into a groove carved in the blocks beneath. All those years of labor seemed concentrated in these final moments.
After the capstone was placed, the ramps were stripped away and the stepped outer stones were cut so that they all continued downwards at one perfect angle. Each block was then highly polished and smoothed to create 4 glittering triangles of stone. The effect would have been blinding, quite different from the pyramid we see today. For today, the pyramids have been stripped of their outer stones, reused in the building of medieval Cairo. But we can still get an inkling of the effect from Khafre's pyramid, which is next to the Great Pyramid. Most of its outer stones have also been taken away, but at the very top they still remain. They've darkened now with age, but they give a sense of how a newly finished pyramid would have looked.